A gradient is a blend of two or more colours. It can even include a blend of solid colours and transparency. Once created, we can use gradients as fill or stroke colours and can create gradient swatches in the swatch panel. To open the gradient panel, either click on it in the panel bar, or if it is not there, you can open it by going to Window and Gradient. The default gradient is a linear fade between black and white. If I want to apply this to an object, I just need to select the object and then click the gradient. My rectangle is now filled with the gradient. A gradient acts like any other swatch colour. I can apply it to the fill or a stroke of an object. Depending on whether the fill or stroke indicator is in the front, this is where the gradient will be applied. So let's go ahead and select my second rectangle. This time I'll bring the stroke indicator to the front and then I'll click on the gradient again. Now a gradient wouldn't be of much use if it could only be black and white and linear, so let's look at how to create custom gradients. First we need to show the gradient options, so click the little icon at the top right of the panel and select Show Options. The gradient options will reflect the gradient details of a selected object and are also dependent on which indicator is at the front in the Tools panel. I'm going to select my first rectangle and then I'm going to make sure the fill indicator is at the front. I can see in the gradient options that this rectangle is filled with a black and white linear gradient. The other type of gradient we can use is a radial gradient, so let's go ahead and select radial from the type drop-down. The gradient is now in the shape of an ellipse. I can change the appearance of a radial gradient by changing the value in the aspect ratio and the angle drop-downs. With linear gradients, only the angle drop-down is applicable. The gradient slider allows me to change the colour aspects of the gradient. I can drag the existing colour nodes up and down the slider to change the appearance. The gradient mixer between two colour nodes allows me to control where the blend point is between the two colours. To change the colour of a colour node, then double-click on it to bring up the swatches panel. I can then either click on an existing swatch, or I can open the colour picker and pick a new colour or enter the exact colour values. I can add additional colour nodes by hovering over the bottom of the slider until my mouse icon shows a little plus next to it. And then I click once to add the new node. By default, the new colour node picks up the blended colour from the slider, but I can change the colour to anything I want by double-clicking and selecting a new colour. If you have your swatches panel open, you can also drag and drop colours from there directly onto the colour nodes. If you want to remove a colour node from the slider, simply drag it downwards and away. Once you are happy with your gradient, you can save it as a swatch either by clicking the new swatch icon or by dragging it from the gradient panel onto the swatch panel. We can adjust the position and start and end points of a gradient within an object by using the gradient tool, which you can find in the Tools panel. With my gradient fill object selected, I click on the gradient tool and I get a gradient slider control appear over the shape. Using the mouse, I can click and drag the slider to any point I require, and I can adjust the start and end points as well as the colour nodes. I am basically doing everything I can do with the gradient panel, but live on the object, making the control more intuitive. I can use the gradient tool on objects with either linear or radial gradients applied. Using gradient fills with the gradient tool, I can also easily create the effect of three-dimensional objects. We can also make gradients that contain transparency, giving the effect of a colour fill fading out. Click on one of the colour nodes on the gradient slider and then select an opacity value somewhere between 0 and 100%. If I look at the visual part of the slider, the checkered background indicates no fill, so the more of this I can see, the more transparent the colour. The final feature of the gradient panel we will look at is the available settings for applying a gradient on a stroke. I have an object here with a thick stroke line I am going to select. Making sure the stroke indicator is at the forefront in the tool panel, I'm going to apply a grayscale gradient to my stroke. Within the gradient panel I have three options for applying gradients to stroke. So apply a gradient within a stroke, apply a gradient along a stroke, and finally apply a gradient across a stroke.